What if the black couple you tried to kick out of first class actually owned the entire airline? When Andre and Nia Sullivan boarded Flight 411, they weren't wearing designer suits or broadcasting their billion-dollar status. They were quiet, composed, just two passengers seeking peace at 35,000 feet. But that peace was short-lived. A flight attendant demanded they move. A privileged passenger claimed their seats. And no one, not even the crew, bothered to ask why this couple looked so calm in the face of disrespect. Because they had a secret. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just shock the cabin, it shook the entire aviation industry. Why did they stay silent at first? What made a little girl in economy the unexpected turning point? And how did this couple turn humiliation into a nationwide movement for equity in the skies? This story will make you think. It will make you feel. And it might just change the way you look at every flight you take from now on. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like these deserve to fly further. Now, let's begin. The soft chime of the boarding announcement echoed through Gate 22A of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. A subtle hum filled the air. Travelers began to gather their bags and shuffle into position, eyes glued to phones, headphones in, minds elsewhere. Andre Sullivan, dressed in a clean navy cashmere sweater and pressed charcoal slacks, rose from his seat with quiet confidence. Beside him, his wife Nia stood and adjusted the strap of her carry-on. She wore a cream blazer over a pale blue blouse, her hair styled into a neat twist bun, understated earrings glinting under the terminal lights. They looked like any other upper-middle-class couple headed to Seattle for a business trip or perhaps a wedding. Nothing about their appearance shouted wealth, let alone ownership. And that was intentional. As they made their way into the jet bridge, Nia leaned closer and spoke softly. "You sure you want to do this today?" Andre glanced at her, his expression calm, measured. "I'm sure. 3 months in and we've seen enough from the outside. It's time we step inside." Their ticket seats, 2A and 2B, were legitimate, booked under real names, no assistants, no heads up to the crew, no special flags. This wasn't a power play. This was an observation mission. The first-class cabin of Astralink's Air Flight 462 was sleek, minimalist, bathed in soft lighting. A hushed scent of citrus cleaner and fabric softener hung in the air. Andre placed his leather duffel in the overhead compartment and helped Nia stow hers before they settled into their seats. She looked at him, eyes scanning for his mood. "You nervous?" He shook his head. "No, I'm just watching." As passengers continued boarding, the Sullivans remained quiet, taking in everything. A young couple across the aisle chatted about a winery tour. A man in a pinstripe suit opened a laptop, already immersed in slides. 10 minutes passed. A flight attendant with a wide smile walked down the aisle, offering pre-flight beverages. She approached a white man in seat 1D, asking brightly, "Would you like champagne or sparkling water, Mr. Easton?" He declined politely. She moved on to 1F, where a woman chose wine. But when the attendant reached the Sullivans, the smile faded slightly. "Can I help you?" Nia smiled politely. "We'd love some water before takeoff, if that's all right." The attendant gave a nod that was barely perceptible. "I'll be back," she said, already turning away. She wasn't. Andre and Nia exchanged a glance. They said nothing. It wasn't the first time a pre-flight drink had been forgotten. 15 minutes later, first class was nearly full. Passengers filled the cabin with polite conversation, soft coughs, and rustling newspapers. Then came the sound of commotion from the entrance of the cabin. A tall white man with silver hair and an expensive navy suit stood near the galley. He looked flustered, waving his hand slightly as he spoke to another flight attendant. No. I always sit in 2A on this flight. Every Thursday. Seattle run. I'm sure the system glitched. Can you fix it? Andre straightened slightly, watching with quiet alertness. Nia closed her eyes briefly, already sensing what was about to unfold. The attendant he was speaking with nodded sympathetically and motioned toward the front of the cabin. Let me get Ms. Hensley. She'll handle it. Moments later, a slim woman in her mid-40s approached. Her blonde hair was pulled tightly into a bun, her expression professionally neutral but cold. Her name tag read Paula Hensley, Senior Cabin Attendant. She stopped in front of the Sullivans without introducing herself. There seems to be a seating issue. May I see your boarding passes? Andre pulled out his phone and held up the digital tickets. Seats 2A and 2B. Booked last week. Confirmed. Paula barely glanced at the screen. I understand, she said. But Mr. Langford is one of our premium loyalty members. He's sat in these seats every week for the past 4 years. I'm sure we can find you comparable seats in economy. Together, Nia's voice was steady. We selected these seats specifically. There's no confusion. Mr. Langford stepped closer, his voice carrying a faint tone of irritation. Look, this isn't personal. I just have an important client call at takeoff. I need the space and privacy I'm used to. There's no need for drama. Andre's fingers tapped lightly on his knee. His voice was calm, deliberate. We have confirmed first-class seats. Mr. Langford, this isn't about drama. It's about respect. Paula Hensley folded her arms. Sir, we're trying to accommodate a valued customer. Your tone is becoming unnecessarily resistant. A woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in her seat. A younger man, a few rows behind, discreetly raised his phone and began recording. Andre looked directly at Paula. Are you suggesting that honoring our confirmed boarding passes is a disruption? Paula hesitated for the briefest moment. If you'd prefer not to cooperate, I can notify security. Nia's phone was already in her hand. She typed quickly and quietly, sending a message to someone named Nathan Reyes. A passenger seated 2 rows back muttered under his breath, This is ridiculous. Still, no one intervened. Andre leaned back slightly. He remembered a time, years ago, when he'd entered a luxury car dealership in Los Angeles wearing jeans and a hoodie. No one had spoken to him for 40 minutes, until he mentioned the cash offer. He remembered a dinner reservation being bumped last minute, a hotel valet who handed him someone else's keys, a corporate board meeting where he introduced a patented algorithm and someone asked if he was part of the IT team. But this was personal, because this wasn't just another company. This was their company, a company built on the idea that people deserve better. As Paula Hensley moved toward the intercom, Andre turned to Nia. They're calling security. Nia didn't look surprised. Good, she said quietly. Let's see how this plays out. Gerald Langford tapped the screen of his Rolex impatiently, the sapphire crystal catching a gleam of the cabin light. He stood just beyond the curtain of first class, half inside the aisle, half refusing to accept what he'd just been told. His voice, low but firm, carried across the front rows. I've sat in 2A on this flight every Thursday morning for the last 4 years. There must be a mistake. Behind him, the younger flight attendant who had tried meekly to explain the manifest stood frozen, unsure whether to retreat or escalate. Gerald turned toward the front of the cabin with purpose. Get me Paula. She knows me. She'll fix this. Paula Hensley reappeared like clockwork, a woman of precision, Polish, and policy. Senior cabin attendant. 18 years with Astralinks and proud of it. She didn't so much walk as glide. Her shoulders squared, her chin slightly raised, her posture military but feminine. She gave Gerald a familiar smile. Half smile, really. The kind reserved for demanding VIPs who complain just often enough to trigger service notes in the loyalty system. "Mr. Langford," she said with practiced warmth. "Of course. Let me handle it." Her smile faded the moment she turned to the Sullivans. This time, she didn't ask. She stated, "There's been a mix-up in our seating system. We'll need you to relocate to seats 12A and 12B in economy. They're together and have extra legroom." Andre remained seated, calm, still. His hands rested gently on his thighs. "Our tickets are correct. We're in our assigned seats. We'll be staying." Nia didn't flinch. She met Paula's stare with something more composed than defiance. She offered no challenge, just presence. Steady, still, and unmovable. Paula crossed her arms. "Mr. Langford is one of our highest-tier customers. He's flown over 2 million miles with us. He's entitled to his preferences." Andre finally looked up at her directly. "And we are entitled to our seats." A few rows behind them, whispers had begun. The young man with the phone was still recording subtly, discreetly. Not because he wanted to post it, but because he knew what was coming. You could sense these moments before they unfolded. Gerald stepped closer, no longer pretending this wasn't personal. "Listen, I've had a long week. I have a Zoom call with a board in Tokyo during taxi. I don't have time for theatrics. You look like decent people. You probably travel a lot. So you get it." "Right," Nia raised an eyebrow, her voice velvet and steel. "You mean we look like the kind of people who should surrender their seats to avoid conflict?" Gerald blinked. Well, he stumbled. There's always a way to resolve things politely." Andre gave him nothing. No smirk, no glare, just silence. Gerald turned to Paula, frustrated. "Are we really doing this?" Paula nodded tightly. "I'll get security." She picked up the cabin phone. Nia turned her head slowly, eyes scanning the rest of first class. The other passengers avoided her gaze. Some looked out the windows. Others feigned interest in magazines they hadn't touched since boarding. All heard what was happening. No one said a word. Andre's thoughts wandered in the brief silence that followed. He remembered the first time he flew business class. He was 29, fresh off his Series B funding round for Sable Corps. He'd upgraded using points and wore his best suit. And yet, the attendant serving that flight had asked 3 times if he was in the right seat. Every time, he had smiled and shown the ticket. Back then, he had rationalized it. Maybe she was tired. Maybe it was just a mistake. But over time, the mistakes added up. The double looks, the assumptions, the selective smiles, they always added up. Behind the curtain, 2 uniformed security officers stepped onto the aircraft. Officer Trent Baylor led the way. Tall, composed, dark-skinned with a military jawline. Behind him was Officer Lucia Flores, younger, quieter, alert. "Ms." Hensley greeted them with confidence. "We have a pair of non-compliant passengers in 2A and 2B. They're refusing to follow instructions and move." Trent's gaze drifted toward the Sullivans. What he saw wasn't confrontation. It was stillness. Andre sat like stone, spine straight, hands visible, eyes neutral. Nia's posture was relaxed, but her expression unmistakable, controlled fire. "May I see your boarding documents?" Sir Trent asked. Andre handed over his phone. "Confirmed. 2A and 2B. booked under Andre and Nia Sullivan. Trent glanced at the screen, then back at Paula. Their seats are correct. Paula's smile twitched. There must be a glitch. These passengers weren't expected. We always place Mr. Langford in these seats. Gerald, who had stepped back during the arrival of security, raised his hand slightly. Look, it's not about race or whatever. I just fly every week. It's routine. I just didn't expect Trent cut him off with a firm but professional tone. That may be, sir. But confirmed seat assignments take precedence. Lucia looked toward Andre and asked gently, Would you like to be moved to another row? Andre replied. No. Thank you. We're comfortable here. Suddenly, a new voice entered the cabin. Excuse me. Everyone turned. A tall, lean man in a slim gray suit walked down the aisle from the jet bridge. His badge gleamed. Nathan Reyes, Vice President of Operations. He stopped just behind the security team and addressed the Sullivans with a subtle bow of his head. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I apologize for the disruption. We were not expecting you on this flight, but we're honored to have you aboard. Paula's mouth opened slightly. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. You know them? She asked cautiously. Nathan didn't look at her. Yes, I do. Very well. He turned to Trent and Lucia. Officers, thank you. The situation is under control. Trent nodded, slowly piecing it together. Of course, we'll step back. As they turned to leave, Nia looked at Nathan. Are we good? Nathan replied. I've already notified Captain Blake. Just then, the curtain parted. Captain Aaron Blake stepped forward, his uniform crisp, his expression tight. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, welcome. I had no idea you'd be joining us today. Paula stared at him. Who exactly are they? Captain Blake hesitated for only a second. They are the new majority stakeholders in Astralinks Air. Gas. The young man recording dropped his phone into his lap. Gerald Langford blinked rapidly, his face turning shades of red not seen in nature. Paula stepped back, as if the cabin had tilted. Andre stood, slowly. I believe you said there were other available seats? He said calmly to Gerald. Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it. 2. Didn't realize Nia stood beside Andre. Her voice was quiet, but cutting. And that's the issue. We shouldn't need titles to be treated with dignity. Captain Blake cleared his throat. We'd like to offer our sincerest apologies. Andre looked around the cabin. Not just to us. I think your passengers deserve transparency too. Paula tried to speak, then stopped. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted entirely. From indifference to awareness, from silence to scrutiny. Nathan turned to Paula. Let's have a word in the galley. Now. As they disappeared behind the curtain, Andre and Nia sat again. Nia whispered, This isn't even the hard part. Andre replied, without smiling. No, this was just the reveal. Andre sat quietly, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, the other gently gripping the edge of his seat. Nia sat beside him, her back straight, eyes forward, fingers intertwined in her lap. The cabin had quieted. The buzz of gossip and disbelief that had just swept through first class was now simmering below the surface. Passengers were still processing what they had just witnessed. Gerald Langford had retreated 2 rows back. His expression was blank, his jaw tight, as he clutched his briefcase and slid it beneath a new seat assigned by the crew. He hadn't spoken a word since Captain Blake's announcement. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look their way. Andre noticed, but he wasn't surprised. People like Gerald didn't apologize. They adjusted. They found new angles, waited for the moment to reclaim control. Beside him, Nia was calm on the outside, but inside, her thoughts were racing. Years of carefully built restraint had trained her to respond with poise when others would explode. But that didn't mean the fire wasn't there. It was always there. It burned behind her ribs, steady, quiet, waiting for moments like these. Paula Hensley returned from the galley. Her walk had changed, not the same confident glide. Her shoes still clicked on the flooring, but now with hesitation, with weight. She stopped beside their row and took a breath before speaking. "I would like to apologize to both of you. I didn't know who you were." Andre didn't blink. "And if we weren't who we are?" Paula opened her mouth, but no words came. A soft murmur from a passenger in the row behind filled the silence for a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and said what people like her were trained to say in moments like this. "We value all our customers. But as you can imagine, we often have to make last-minute accommodations for our premium flyers." Nia cut in. "That's not what happened here. This wasn't about policies or priority lists. This was about an assumption that we didn't belong, that we were the ones who should move." Nia's voice didn't rise, but it landed like thunder. Andre leaned back slightly. "We've seen a pattern across dozens of flights. Different cities, different crew, same result." He looked up at her. His voice softened. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a mirror." Paula's eyes flicked around nervously, as if hoping someone else might interrupt. But no one did. The weight of the cabin was firmly on her shoulders now. Captain Blake stepped forward again, standing quietly beside Paula. He didn't speak at first, just nodded at Andre and Nia. "Would you be open to a conversation in the galley privately?" Andre looked to Nia. She gave a slight nod. The couple rose and followed the captain past the curtain. The galley smelled faintly of disinfectant and lemon polish. The narrow space felt more intimate now, the kind of place where hard truths weren't so easy to run from. Captain Blake leaned against the service counter, his arms crossed gently. Paula stood near the exit door, rigid but silent. Andre turned to them both. "This isn't the first time this has happened. It's the first time we've chosen to expose it," Nia added. "We've flown under other names, in economy and business, watched interactions, tracked patterns, logged incidents, and your airline isn't unique." Captain Blake's brow furrowed. "I believe you. I do. But to be fair, I've always tried to run a respectful ship." "We're not saying it's you," Andre said. "We're saying it's the culture, the assumptions baked into everyday service." Nia looked at Paula. "And it's not enough to say you didn't know. You didn't bother to ask. That's what stung." Paula inhaled deeply, then spoke with a surprising edge of honesty. "You're right. I saw what I expected to see. Two unfamiliar faces in seats that, in my mind, belonged to someone else. I made a judgment, a wrong one." She hesitated, voice thinning. "I don't want to be the face of this kind of moment, but maybe I already am." Andre didn't gloat. He just said softly, "We're not here to ruin careers. We're here to change the way things are done." Captain Blake nodded slowly. "Then maybe this is a start. Back in first class." The tension hadn't left. Gerald tapped away at his laptop furiously. The rest of the passengers avoided looking at him or at the now vacant 2A and 2B. A few moments later, Andre and Nia returned to their seats. Paula followed and, without a word, began removing items from the service cart. She handed the duties off to another crew member, Miles Tran, the younger attendant, fresh-faced and watchful. Miles stepped up with careful professionalism. "Would either of you like a drink before takeoff?" Andre smiled faintly. "Water would be great." Nia nodded. "Same." Miles returned quickly and with care, setting down the glasses with quiet grace. His eyes met theirs for a brief moment, and in them, Andre saw something different. Respect, gratitude, maybe even admiration. The intercom crackled above them. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be taxiing shortly. We appreciate your patience today, and we thank you for flying Astralinks." A soft chime followed, then silence. Andre turned to Nia, lowering his voice. "You think we made our point?" Nia looked toward the window. Outside, the tarmac shimmered with heat. The engines rumbled faintly beneath them. "We made a dent," she said. "The crack is there. Now we see who follows it." As the plane pulled away from the gate, phones buzzed throughout the cabin. Passengers shared texts, short videos, screenshots. Already, the incident was spreading, and somewhere, down the aisle in economy, someone whispered to their seatmate, "You won't believe what just happened in first class." The plane began taxiing down the runway, the soft rumble beneath the cabin growing into a steady vibration. Overhead lights dimmed, and seatbelt signs blinked on in quiet rhythm. Inside the first-class cabin, the tension hadn't entirely dissolved, but something had shifted. There was awareness now. Andre rested his head lightly against the headrest. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the curved wall ahead of him, beside him. Nia scrolled slowly through her phone, checking the latest news alerts. A small article had already popped up from a business aviation blog. Unconfirmed report: black couple challenged in first class turns out to be airline owners. It had begun. Andre whispered, low enough for only Nia to hear. "We haven't even left the ground and they're already talking." Nia didn't look up. Let them talk. "We didn't cause the stir. The truth did." He nodded faintly, but his thoughts were tangled. What would the board say? How many employees on this flight even knew who they were? The anonymity they'd once valued was dissolving midair, and with that, the burden of visibility was rising. As the aircraft lifted gently into the sky, the flight smoothed out. Clouds drifted past like slow-moving ghosts. Andre closed his eyes for a moment, but he wasn't tired. He was remembering the board meeting when he and Nia voted to acquire a controlling stake in Astralinks Air. Remembering their plan to keep a low profile and assess the company culture from within. And remembering the advisors who warned them not to get emotionally involved with frontline operations. But how could they not? Especially when the front line turned out to be the front lines of discrimination. The soft chime above signaled the end of the initial climb. Passengers unbuckled, trays folded down, drinks clinked, but all of it felt subdued. Miles Tran returned to their row, setting down a small snack tray. "Would you like to review the meal options for today's flight?" Nia gave him a warm smile. "Sure. Thank you. Miles." He handed her the leather-bound menu, eyes lowering slightly as if to say, "I'm watching. I'm learning." Andre noticed. Then came the voice over the intercom. "Ms. Hensley to the cockpit. Please. Ms. Hensley to the cockpit." It was Captain Blake's voice, sharp but not panicked, a formal tone, businesslike. Paula Hensley glanced up from the galley. She exchanged a quick look with Miles before stepping briskly down the aisle and vanishing through the cockpit door. The next 10 minutes passed in relative quiet, but the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Somewhere near row 4, a baby cried softly. Across the aisle, someone coughed and muttered into a phone on airplane mode. But the energy in first class was a collective inhale. Then something unexpected happened. 2 federal security agents entered the cabin. No announcement, no noise. Just the soft shuffle of professional footwear and clipped radio static on their shoulders. Passengers looked up, startled. Even Gerald Langford straightened. Nia instinctively sat taller. Andre narrowed his eyes. The agent stopped at row 2. 1 male, 1 female, dressed in plain clothes but unmistakably official. They leaned down, speaking low. "Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan, would you be willing to come with us to the forward galley for a moment?" Andre didn't move. "What is this regarding?" The male agent remained calm. "Captain Blake has requested a discussion regarding the security protocols on board. There's been some confusion that needs clarification." Nia met Andre's eyes. Not fear, not surprise, just a simmering disbelief. Andre stood. "We'll speak, but we won't be ambushed." Nia followed, holding her chin high. Passengers whispered again. Phones tilted subtly, trying to record without being obvious. Andre and Nia were escorted to the galley. Captain Blake stood there, arms crossed. Paula Hensley was beside him, lips pressed tight, and behind them, Nathan Reyes had appeared again, his face unusually tense. Andre broke the silence. "Security." Really, Captain Blake raised a hand. "Mr. Sullivan, I assure you, this is not a threat. But Ms. Hensley has just submitted a formal incident report, and per federal aviation protocol, we are obligated to document and verify anything classified as a service disruption or passenger misconduct." Nia laughed once, sharply. "So now we're being documented." Nathan stepped forward. "I didn't approve this. I was just notified minutes ago." Andre's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. The report accuses us of being non-compliant." Paula finally spoke. "I followed the handbook. You refused to move. That counts as a passenger refusing crew instruction." Andre replied instantly, "Your instruction was invalid, based on a false premise and personal bias." The agents remained neutral, but they weren't oblivious. They could sense the undercurrent. They'd seen stories like this before, on phones, in the media, but now they were standing in one. Nathan's voice came low but firm. "We're scrubbing the report. It doesn't hold. But we need you both to understand something." He paused. "You've just gone from observers to symbols. The board is already hearing about this. External media will follow. You will be the story." Nia folded her arms. "We didn't ask to be symbols." Nathan nodded. "And yet, here we are." Andre exhaled slowly. "Then let's be clear. If we're going to be the story, we'll tell it our way." He looked at the agents. "We're returning to our seats." They stepped aside. As they walked back down the aisle, passengers parted slightly in their seats, giving them space. Even those who hadn't spoken now watched with a different kind of attention. Not judgment, not pity. Recognition, the kind that only comes when someone refuses to shrink. Back in 2A and 2B. Nia sat and exhaled. "It's not about the seat," she whispered. Andre nodded. "It never was." The hum of the engines filled the silence between Andre and Nia. The plane cruised above the clouds, its wings slicing through soft currents of air. But inside row 2, turbulence still lingered. Andre leaned slightly toward Nia. His voice was quiet. "They wanted to intimidate us, wrap the moment in procedure and make us question our place. But they underestimated what we've already survived." Nia nodded. She had heard the captain's voice, the agent's polite but cold words, and Paula's filed report. But she'd also heard something else beneath it all, fear, not fear of them, Fear of exposure. They were no longer anonymous passengers. They were a reckoning. From behind the curtain, the sound of approaching footsteps made both of them turn their heads. It was Miles Tran again, holding a small silver tray with 2 fresh drinks and a folded linen napkin. He stopped by their seats and smiled gently. "Captain Blake asked me to offer this as a peace gesture. Sparkling water with lime, no alcohol." He figured it was the least disruptive refreshment under the circumstances. Nia accepted hers with a raised brow. And did he say what the most disruptive one would be? Miles gave a short laugh, the tension breaking just a little. "No, ma'am, but I think we've already had it." He hesitated, then added, quietly, "For what it's worth. I've seen how these things usually go, and I've never seen anyone hold their ground the way you two did." "Thank you." Andre looked at him. "What's your name again?" "Miles Tran, sir." "How long have you been flying? 2 years. Started just before the pandemic. I stayed because I thought this job could help me see the world." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "And what have you seen?" Miles hesitated. "Enough to know who gets treated like they belong and who doesn't." There was no need to say more. Miles nodded and stepped away. Nia turned to Andre. "That young man, he reminds me of you on your first consulting trip to London. Remember the hotel that thought you were my assistant?" Andre smiled. "Barely. You ripped them apart at checkout." They shared a soft laugh, not because it was funny, but because sometimes humor was the only way to carry pain. A few rows back, Gerald Langford was still seated stiffly in 4D. He hadn't spoken since the security officers left, but his eyes were sharp, watching everything, not in curiosity, but calculation. The kind of watching that looked for leverage, for angles, for a way back to comfort. Suddenly, the curtain separating first class from the galley swished open again. This time, it wasn't Miles or a flight attendant. It was Linda Evers, Chief of Human Resources for Astra Lynx Air. She had boarded quietly during the gate hold and had remained in the forward cabin, working from her tablet. But after watching the escalation from her seat in row 1, she had decided enough was enough. She approached Andre and Nia with purpose. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, may I speak with you?" Andre gestured toward the empty seat beside Nia. "Of course." Linda sat down. She was a black woman in her early 50s, her voice refined, her expression composed. There was something resolute in the way she held herself, a quiet command. "I watched what happened from the beginning," she said, "and I want you to know this is not going to be buried. Not under policy, not under PR." Andre studied her face. "Then what do you propose?" Linda reached into her blazer and pulled out a tablet. "This morning, before any of this happened, we finalized our diversity audit results. Quietly. The numbers weren't good." She tapped the screen. "Our staff ranks in customer-facing roles are diverse, but senior flight operations, hiring, and complaint resolution are overwhelmingly homogeneous. 91% white, 84% male." Nia raised an eyebrow. "So the faces at the gate look like the world, but the decisions above them don't." "Exactly," Linda said. "We've launched initiatives, made statements, formed committees, but they've been reactive, not transformative." Andre leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time to transform from the top down." Linda smiled. "That's why I'm here. I want to offer you something. Not a statement, not an apology email." She looked between them. "A seat on the Internal Equity Board. You'd co-chair with me. Help reshape hiring, training, culture, everything." Andre blinked. That's not a small ask. It's not a small company, she replied. Nia interjected, her tone measured. And what happens to Paula Linda glanced back toward the galley. That's under review. But this story, it's going to travel farther than her. The media will spin it. The public will choose sides. The board will want silence. But silence never healed anything. Andre sat back. He thought of every meeting where he had tried to push reform quietly, every polite rejection, every nod from someone who didn't want to rock the boat. He looked at Linda. We'll do it, but not quietly. If we're going to change the culture, we can't whisper into it. We have to speak through it. Linda nodded. Then buckle up. We just left the runway. She stood and returned to her seat. Nia leaned against Andre gently. Do you realize what you just agreed to? He smiled. Barely. Rebellion in a suit. She reached over and took his hand. Let's make it count. As the flight continued, a kind of quiet reverence filled the cabin. Not silence, but something more thoughtful. The moment had passed, but the impact had not. People had witnessed something real. Not rage, not violence, dignity. And dignity, when fully expressed, is the loudest force in any room. The sun had begun its descent, casting long golden shadows across the wing of the aircraft as it sliced through a sea of clouds. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was quiet but restless. Some passengers leaned back into their seats, headphones on, pretending to be unaffected. But they had felt the shift. They had witnessed a moment that exposed more than discomfort, exposed something buried beneath routine. Andre stared out the window, the light glazing his face with a soft warmth. But his mind wasn't on the view. It was on his father. He could hear his voice deep, weary from years of labor, but always grounded. Son, when they see you're calm, they'll think it means you're weak. But don't let that fool you. Stillness is where power lives. Andre closed his eyes. His father had never flown first class, never even boarded a plane until he was 52. But he taught Andre how to walk into a room and own it without raising his voice. Now, decades later, Andre had walked into this cabin, sat in the right seat, followed every rule, and still, he had been asked to prove he belonged. And yet, here he remained. Nia sat quietly beside him, scrolling through her tablet. She was rereading an old article, one she had bookmarked years ago, a piece about black professionals in executive roles, and the exhaustion that came from always being the first or the only in a room. She remembered the quote that stood out. You don't carry just your briefcase. You carry your people. And that was exactly what she felt now. Not just the weight of her own dignity, but of the people who had texted, posted, whispered in office halls that it was impossible, that people like her would never make it to the top without surrendering a part of themselves. She hadn't surrendered. And today, the world saw it. A soft bump shook the cabin. Nothing sharp, just enough to make a few drinks tremble in their cups. The overhead light chimed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've hit a small patch of turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Thank you. Andre glanced around. The sudden movement startled a few passengers, and even Gerald Langford, still seated rigidly in 4D, had gripped his armrest with a jerk. Andre looked at Nia. You okay? She nodded. Just nature reminding us who's in charge. The plane shook again, slightly harder this time. A few gasps rippled through the cabin. Miles Tran moved quickly, securing items in the galley, his eyes scanning the aisle. Paula Hensley returned from the cockpit. Her face looked flushed, more from internal pressure than the altitude. She stopped at row 2, hesitant. "Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan, I'd like to say something." Andre turned to her, expression unreadable. "We're listening." Paula took a deep breath. "I've been a flight attendant for nearly 20 years. I've handled emergencies, medical calls, turbulence, mechanical delays, but nothing rattled me like today. Because I wasn't challenged by chaos, I was challenged by truth." She looked at Nia. "I saw what I expected. And when you didn't move, I assumed it was defiance. But it wasn't. It was discipline, dignity. I misread both of you because I never expected to see that kind of power sitting here. And that says more about me than it ever did about you." Nia held her gaze. "And what do you plan to do with that truth?" Paula blinked, surprised by the question. I'm not sure, but I don't want to pretend anymore. I want to learn. I want to do better." Andre responded, softly but firmly. "Then start by making sure the next time you see someone in a seat they paid for, you assume they belong." Paula nodded. Her eyes glistened, just for a second. Then she turned and walked away. Nia leaned back and whispered, "Did that feel sincere?" Andre took a moment. "I think it felt human." The plane rocked once more. Heavier now. The lights above flickered for a heartbeat before stabilizing. A few overhead bins popped open, and a tray slid across the galley floor. Now it wasn't just symbolism. It was real turbulence. Captain Blake came over the intercom again, voice calm but alert. "Flight crew, take your jump seats." Paula and Miles locked themselves into the galley harnesses. Passengers fumbled with seat belts. The man across the aisle clutched his wife's hand. Gerald Langford's laptop slid off his tray and crashed to the floor. Andre instinctively reached over and held Nia's hand. Not out of fear, but something deeper. Connection. The shaking lasted for a few minutes, long enough to remind everyone that up here, none of them were really in control. And when it finally passed, a wave of stillness flooded the cabin. No one spoke. No one resumed work or movies or conversation. They just sat. A few minutes later, Captain Blake's voice returned, softer this time. "We've cleared the rough air. Thank you for staying calm." The flight attendants resumed service slowly, carefully, and Andre noticed something else, too. Paula and Miles didn't just return to routine. They walked differently, more attentively, more thoughtfully, like something inside them had shifted. As if the turbulence wasn't just outside. Nia broke the silence between them. It always takes a storm. Andre nodded. "Yeah, people don't listen to quiet warnings. They wait for everything to shake." He looked down at the floor, where Gerald's laptop had landed near his feet. He picked it up, brushed it off, and stood. Gerald looked up, surprised. Andre extended it toward him. "Your laptop." Gerald hesitated, then took it. "Thanks." Their eyes locked for a moment. Andre didn't need to say anything. The gesture spoke louder than words, and Gerald, for once, had none. Back in their seats. Andre exhaled and let his shoulders drop slightly. Nia rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think this plane will land differently than it took off?" Andre looked ahead. "Maybe not. But the people on board won't forget what happened in the air." The wheels kissed the runway with a soft screech, followed by the low hum of deceleration as the aircraft slowed its momentum along the tarmac. Seatbelt signs glowed above their heads, and the familiar ping sounded in the cabin. Andre let out a quiet breath. His shoulders remained relaxed, but his mind was alert, anticipating what waited just beyond the aircraft's walls. Nia glanced at him. "You okay?" He nodded. Yeah, just preparing. Outside. The terminal windows revealed the soft orange light of late afternoon fading into dusk. A ground crew approached the jet, the flashing lights of airport vehicles illuminating the fuselage. But inside the cabin, the tension still lingered. People began unfastening their seatbelts, the sound of clicks breaking the hush. Bags rustled from overhead compartments, but no one looked quite the same as they did at takeoff. Expressions had changed. Conversations were muted. Even Gerald Langford sat silently, no longer projecting superiority, only discomfort. Miles Tran moved toward the front of the cabin, his steps slower now, more mindful. He stopped by row 2, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan. We'll be deplaning through the front jetway. The gate agents have been notified. Andre smiled gently. Thank you. Miles? Nia added. We'll remember your professionalism. He gave a short nod. That meant more to him than they knew. Captain Blake's voice came over the intercom one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Astralinks Air, we thank you for choosing to fly with us. We hope your journey was safe and comfortable. For some of you, today may have been more than just another flight. We hope you leave with not just your luggage, but something to think about. Thank you, and welcome to Seattle. The intercom clicked off. Passengers stood and began forming a line. No one rushed. For once, no one pushed. Something about the atmosphere called for stillness. As Andre and Nia stood, a woman in her mid-40s tapped Nia's arm. She had sandy blonde hair, faint crow's feet near her eyes, and wore a business blazer. Her voice was soft, nervous. I just wanted to say, I watched what happened. I was wrong not to speak up. I should have said something sooner. Nia looked at her, not with resentment, but clarity. Silence has weight, but so does change. Thank you for telling me. The woman nodded, then moved quietly down the aisle. Andre and Nia were the last to exit first class. As they approached the front door, Paula Hensley stood near the galley. Her hands were folded in front of her. She didn't smile. She didn't pretend. Instead, she stepped forward. Before you go, I want to say thank you. Not just for the grace you showed me, but for holding up a mirror I didn't want to see. Andre paused, looking into her eyes. Just promise you won't put it down. She nodded. They stepped into the jetway, the cool breeze of the terminal hallway greeting them like a sigh. Waiting just past the door stood Linda Evers, the CHRO holding a tablet, her jaw set. Beside her was a man in a dark-tailored suit, gray at the temples, black-framed glasses, and a firm grip on his leather portfolio. This was the chairman of the board, Thomas Wynn. Andre's brows raised. Didn't expect to see you here. Thomas gave a small nod. After the morning I've had, I figured it was time I stopped reading memos and started showing up. Linda gestured to a nearby lounge private, glass-walled, tucked away from the bustle of Gate 47. Let's talk. Inside the lounge, they took seats around a small conference table. A carafe of water sat untouched in the center. Thomas started, First, let me be honest. I didn't know you were both flying today. I didn't know about the incident until halfway through the flight. And I certainly didn't know that an internal complaint had already reached HR before you even landed. Nia leaned forward. That's the problem, Thomas. Not just what happened, but that you didn't know. We've been anonymous shareholders by design, but we didn't expect our anonymity to reveal such deep fractures, Andre added. And now that the curtain's been pulled back, what do you plan to do? Thomas looked at Linda. She filled me in on your conversation. The equity board, the culture shifts. I support it all, but I also believe this isn't just an internal story anymore. He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a live headline from a national business outlet. Flight attendant attempts to relocate black couple from first class. They turn out to be jet owners. Andre exhaled. It's begun. Thomas nodded. And it's spreading. We can't control the narrative anymore, but we can choose how we respond. Nia spoke softly. Then respond by taking the side of truth, not optics. Thomas folded his hands. I want to hold a press conference with you. I want the public to know that Astralinks isn't just a name, it's a vision for equity. You've already embodied that. Now let's make it policy. Andre and Nia exchanged a glance. This wasn't what they had planned, but it felt right. Nia said, on one condition. Thomas looked up. The next time a black couple walks onto one of our planes, no one should need a press release to justify their seat. He smiled. Deal. They stood and shook hands. Outside, the airport bustled as usual. People wheeled luggage, held coffee, rushed to gates. Most were unaware that something had just changed behind that glass door. But change didn't need applause. It needed follow-through. Andre turned to Nia as they walked toward the exit. You know this isn't the end, right? She squeezed his hand. No, it's the beginning we were meant to write. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't just passengers or executives. They were authors of a new story. 2 days later, the skyline of downtown Seattle stood under a blanket of gray clouds. Inside the towering glass headquarters of Astralinks Air, the tension in the boardroom wasn't coming from the weather. Andre and Nia sat at the polished mahogany table, their reflections glimmering faintly on its surface. Linda Evers stood beside them, her tablet in hand. A media strategist, a legal advisor, and 3 board members sat across from them. A large screen at the end of the room showed a paused video feed of a recent news segment. We're live outside Astralinks Air headquarters where sources confirm the couple involved in last week's first-class controversy are, in fact, 2 of the airline's silent majority stakeholders. The segment paused, frozen on an image of Andre and Nia deplaning with dignity, side by side, holding hands. Andre leaned forward. How much longer do we keep pretending this is just a PR situation? The media strategist cleared his throat. To be honest, we've never seen a story pick up this kind of traction in under 48 hours. It's not just domestic. BBC, Al Jazeera, even Japanese morning news. People are watching because they're seeing themselves in it, Linda added. They're seeing the imbalance. And the moment someone stood up to it, not with fists, with presence. Nia looked around the table. Then let's give them something real to hold on to. Not another panel, not another committee. Real action. One of the board members, a silver-haired man named Gregory Willis, frowned slightly. What exactly are we proposing? Linda turned to the screen and tapped through a series of slides. A complete audit of training protocols, bias intervention simulations for all frontline staff, real accountability metrics tied to performance reviews, and a new leadership pipeline that reflects the world we serve, not just the one that built the airline 50 years ago. Willis raised a brow. And what's the projected cost? Andre didn't hesitate. What's the cost of doing nothing? The room went silent. Then Nia spoke, her voice calm but unflinching. I want to be very clear. We didn't ask for the spotlight, but we're not going to dim it now that it's here. This is about more than one flight. This is about a system that taught a flight attendant to look at 2 black passengers and assume we didn't belong. Willis glanced away, but he didn't interrupt. Linda stepped forward. We also want to live stream the internal town hall. Let employees hear directly from Andre and Nia, not filtered through PR. Straight from the source. There was a long pause. Then Thomas Wynn's voice came through the speakerphone on the table. I support it. Everyone turned to the phone. Thomas continued, and I'll open the town hall. But I want to hear from the people this truly affected. Not just the headlines, but the human cost. Andre looked at the screen again. The frozen image of himself walking down the jet bridge was now iconic, but it hadn't been about image. It had been about truth, and truth was louder than ever. The next morning, the town hall began. Thousands of employees tuned in virtually. Hundreds gathered in person in the auditorium of the headquarters. The energy was cautious, curious, and heavy. Thomas Wynn stepped onto the stage. I've been in corporate aviation for 35 years. I've seen scandals, strikes, even near bankruptcies. But I've never seen a moment pierce through corporate layers the way this one did. He paused, because this time, the mirror turned toward us. He motioned toward Andre and Nia. Today, you'll hear from two of our own. Not as executives, not even as shareholders, but as people who deserve to be seen for who they are, not who others assume they are. Andre took the stage first. He wore no tie, no script, just a clean white shirt, sleeves rolled up, voice steady. I want to start by saying, this isn't about one flight. This is about every hallway we walked down where people looked through us, every gate where our boarding passes were double-checked, while others strolled through, every meeting where our presence raised questions before our credentials did. He scanned the crowd. Some of you may have done this without knowing. Some of you may have watched it happen and said nothing, and some of you are victims of it yourselves. He paused, but silence is a luxury not everyone can afford. He stepped back, and Nia took the microphone. I was raised by a single mother who cleaned hotel rooms at night so I could study by day. She taught me that power doesn't come from titles. It comes from choices. The choice to speak, the choice to act, the choice to believe that you belong when the world tells you otherwise. She looked straight into the camera. To every employee watching this from a break room, a galley, or a tiny office in a regional hub, your voice matters. This company doesn't belong to the loudest room. It belongs to those who hold it accountable. The room erupted into applause. Not polite, powerful. Even the online chat feed, usually full of neutral emojis, flooded with clapping hands, heart reactions, and messages like, they said what we've been thinking? This is what leadership looks like. Finally, truth on this stage. Backstage. Linda exhaled. She had gambled on this moment and it paid off. But she also knew the real work was just beginning. After the event, Andre and Nia returned to their private office. A dozen emails were already waiting. Media requests, speaking invitations, even a book offer. Andre scrolled through them, then turned to Nia. We didn't plan for any of this. She smiled softly. No, but maybe it planned for us. He looked at her. You think people will listen? She touched his hand. They already are. Just then, a knock at the door interrupted the moment. It was Paula Hensley. She looked nervous, holding a folder. Her uniform was neatly pressed. No name tag. I'm not here to defend what I did, she said. I'm here because I spent the last 48 hours rereading our training materials, looking at myself, and I want to help rebuild what I broke. Nia stood and walked toward her. That's not a small promise. Paula's voice cracked slightly. I don't want small anymore. Andre stepped beside his wife. Then let's start with this. Help us design the training. Help us make sure the next generation of flight attendants learns what we didn't get." Paula looked stunned. "You trust me with that," Nia nodded. "Growth has to start somewhere." They all stood in silence for a beat. Then Paula extended her hand. They shook on it, and somewhere far below, the city moved on. Taxis honked, planes lifted, emails were sent. But inside Astralink's air, something rare had taken flight. A cultural shift, built not on slogans, but on truth. The weeks that followed felt like riding a wave neither Andre nor Nia had seen coming. Public support continued to grow, pouring in from passengers, employees, even competitors. Social media hashtags took hold. Rouse, fly with dignity. Jet justice. And the most viral of all, they own the jet. But behind the headlines and interviews, real change was happening. In a bright meeting space overlooking the Seattle skyline, a small team of people gathered: policy analysts, training consultants, diversity advocates, and frontline employees. And sitting at the head of the table were Andre and Nia. Today's agenda wasn't symbolic. It was structural. Andre leaned forward, pointing to the screen. The new onboarding curriculum doesn't just include DEI terminology. It opens with real passenger testimonies, people who felt unseen, unsafe, or silently judged. Their words need to be more than data. They need to be the first lesson. A woman from the training department, Maya Thomas, nodded. "We've built interactive simulations based on actual scenarios. Agents, flight attendants, even pilots will walk through decisions that challenge implicit bias. Not just policies," Nia added, "and not just race. We're looking at disability, language, gender identity. We want the culture of this airline to reflect the full spectrum of humanity, not just the parts that make people comfortable." There was a moment of quiet after she spoke, not from disagreement, but from the weight of the work. Paula Hensley sat at the other end of the table, pen in hand. She had returned not as a flight attendant, but as a consultant helping reform the very system that had once failed her. Too. She looked up. "Can I share something?" All eyes turned to her. "I was trained to recognize threats and behaviors. Loud passengers, unusual requests, nervous speech. But no one ever trained me to examine the lens I was looking through. The assumptions already in me before I even looked up." She paused. "I want to help every crew member learn to look inward before they react outward." Andre gave her a nod of approval. Her words mattered here. She'd earned that. 3 days later, Andre stood inside one of Astralink's newest hangars. A full-scale replica of a first-class cabin had been rebuilt for simulation exercises. The cabin looked identical in seat configurations, overhead bins, lighting, even faux windows. But this was no luxury experience. This was where behaviors would be tested. 2 instructors walked in, role-playing as passengers. A young black man in business attire and a white woman with a service dog. 2 flight attendants in training stood nervously near the galley. Andre watched from behind mirrored glass. The woman asked for help storing her medical bag. The young man asked for a blanket and water. Nothing unusual. But as one trainee quickly assisted the woman and turned away from the man, the system flagged it. A red light blinked. A note popped on screen. "Observe unconscious prioritization pattern." The instructor paused the simulation. "Why did you assist her first?" The trainee looked flustered. She seemed more urgent. The instructor nodded slowly. "That's what we're here to challenge." Back behind the glass, Nia turned to Andre. "They're learning." He nodded. "And not just how to serve, how to see." Meanwhile, public perception of Astralink's air was shifting too. A headline from Forbes read, "From Backlash to Blueprint: How Astralinks Turned a Crisis into a Movement." On CNN, a panel discussed the airline's rapid reforms, calling them the most comprehensive overhaul of culture in commercial aviation since deregulation. And passengers noticed. One man tweeted, "I've flown 3 times with Astralinks since they own the jet. Each flight. I saw crew behave differently, warmer, more intentional. It's not perfect, but it's different, and different matters." Another shared a video of a flight attendant helping a young girl in a wheelchair navigate to her seat without drawing stares or attention. The post read, "Compassion is contagious." Andre scrolled through the comments one evening, feet up in their home office. His phone buzzed. It was a video call from his older sister, Denise, back in Chicago. "You really broke the sky open. Little brother." He chuckled. "Didn't do it alone." Denise shook her head. "No, but you walked through fire with your eyes open. Mom would have been proud." Andre looked down, quiet for a moment. "I keep hearing her voice lately. All those nights she said, 'Don't let them harden you. Baby, you were made for soft power.'" He smiled at the memory. "I finally get it now." Back in Seattle, the airline prepared for a ceremonial relaunch flight. The flight wasn't about going somewhere far. It was about showing the world where they stood now. The invitation-only flight included employees, community leaders, and a few everyday passengers who had written letters to the airline after the incident. And, of course, Andre and Nia would be on board not as owners, but as participants. As they stepped onto the aircraft that morning, something felt different. The crew greeted them not with scripted lines, but genuine recognition. Passengers nodded, some offering quiet smiles of solidarity. Even Gerald Langford, who had been invited back by Thomas Wynne as a gesture of reconciliation, stood up and offered a small nod. "I still have a lot to learn," he admitted. Andre didn't smile, but he replied kindly, "Learning's a good place to start." As the plane took off, the intercom buzzed. "This is your captain speaking. On this flight, we don't just welcome you, see you. Let's fly forward. Together." The cabin applauded. Nia rested her head gently on Andre's shoulder. "Feels different, doesn't it?" He nodded, like we're finally on the right flight. She squeezed his hand. "And this time, no one's asking us to move." The press conference was scheduled for 11:00 a.m. sharp, but the media had started setting up hours earlier. By 10:30, every seat in the Astralinks headquarters auditorium was filled, and camera tripods lined the back wall like a row of sentinels. The backdrop behind the stage was simple, the Astralinks logo, centered above the words "Culture in Motion." Andre adjusted his collar in the green room. Nia stood beside him, reviewing her notes. She wasn't nervous, but she was aware of the moment, its magnitude, and how every word they spoke today would echo far beyond this room. Linda Evers peeked in. "They're ready for you. You both look like justice in motion." Andre smiled faintly. "Let's hope we sound like it, too." They stepped onto the stage to a chorus of camera shutters and polite applause. Thomas Wynne introduced them briefly, then turned the stage over. Andre began, his tone firm but calm. "We didn't come here to make headlines. We came here to make systems better. For every passenger, for every employee, for every person who's ever felt invisible at 35,000 feet. He spoke about policy shifts, accountability, the new equity pipeline. Then he handed the mic to Nia. She stood a little taller. Her voice was clear, not rehearsed but steady. "I've worked in boardrooms, on runways, and in call centers. I've worn a uniform and I've owned the brand. And I'll tell you something no one likes to admit, bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it wears a smile, but it always leaves a bruise. She paused, letting the silence settle. We can't fix what we won't face, so we're choosing to face it. Applause followed. Some loud, some tentative. Then came the Q&A. A woman from a national outlet stood. Have you received apologies from those involved? The flight attendant. The crew, Andre answered. Yes, some privately, some publicly. But we're not here for retribution. We're here for transformation. A local station reporter followed. Do you believe this incident would have gone differently had your ownership been known from the start? Nia didn't blink. Absolutely. And that's exactly why we stayed silent for so long. We wanted to experience what our passengers experience without a title protecting us. Unfortunately, what we found was exactly what many of them already knew. Then a hand went up in the third row. A man in his early 60s, press badge clipped to his lapel, thin gray hair, skeptical eyes. The mic passed to him. You've spoken a lot about visibility and respect, but some critics argue that you used your status as leverage after the fact, that most people wouldn't have the means to make change like this. Doesn't that make your story exceptional, and therefore not representative? The room tensed. It was a subtle accusation. You only made a difference because you're powerful. Andre didn't answer right away. But Nia stepped forward, her voice low and steady. Let me tell you what's exceptional. Being black. Being told subtly your whole life to take up less space. To smile more. To apologize when someone else bumps into you. Let me tell you what's exceptional. Rising through those systems anyway. Earning your seat, buying your ticket, boarding the plane, and still being asked to prove you belong. She looked directly at the reporter. This isn't about wealth. It's about worth. And worth shouldn't have to be proven on every flight. We didn't use power to create this moment. We used pain, and pain is universal. The room went quiet. A few people lowered their eyes. One camera operator blinked hard, fighting tears. Andre picked up where she left off. And if we're lucky enough to be the exception that opens the door for the rule to change, then we'll walk through that door again and again. Applause followed. This time, it was no longer polite. It was full-bodied, real. After the conference, the couple retreated to a quiet lounge set aside for them. Linda joined them with a bottle of sparkling water and 2 glasses. I've never seen the room lean forward like that before, she said. Pouring? You didn't just answer questions. You answered the ones people were too afraid to ask. Andre accepted a glass, and we're not done. That question, the one about privilege, that's going to echo. Nia nodded, and maybe it should. They sipped in silence for a moment. Then Linda's phone buzzed. She checked it and smiled. CNN wants to do a full hour with you two. No edits. Now just a sit down. Andre raised an eyebrow. Prime time. Prime time. Nia leaned back and exhaled. Then let's make every minute count. That evening, the sun dipped low across Puget Sound. The sky burned orange and purple. In a small park not far from the headquarters, Nia walked quietly along a gravel path. A breeze lifted her curls gently. She needed space to reflect. She sat on a bench beneath a Japanese maple, watching the wind play with the leaves. Footsteps approached behind her. It was Andre. I figured I'd find you here. She smiled. You know me too well. He sat beside her. You were amazing today. She looked out toward the water. I kept thinking about that first flight we ever took together. Remember that puddle jumper to St. Louis? We got bumped to the back row, even though we'd paid extra for business. Andre nodded. They said the upgrade list changed last minute. She shook her head. We didn't complain then. We just accepted it, like we were supposed to. He touched her hand. We don't accept it anymore. She turned to him. I know, but it still lives inside me sometimes. That quiet voice asking if we're being too loud, too demanding, too much. Andre leaned in closer. You weren't too much today. You were just enough to shake the room. She smiled, eyes glistening. Promise me something. Anything. Don't let us become the kind of leaders who forget what it feels like to be unseen. He kissed her hand softly. Never. Later that night, in homes across America, people rewatched the clip of Nia's answer to the press. It was shared millions of times. Underneath it, a woman from Detroit wrote, I played this for my 12-year-old daughter. She looked at Nia and said, She talks like me. And for the first time, I think my baby saw herself flying first class, not just on a plane, but in life. And in that moment, Nia's words born of fire, restraint, and grace took flight in hearts far beyond the auditorium. Astralink's Flight 721 was just another hop from Chicago to Phoenix, or at least, it was supposed to be. The boarding process moved quickly, with passengers flowing into the cabin as usual. It was the kind of flight that business travelers barely noticed anymore, routine, quiet, forgettable, until Seat 2B changed everything. Nia sat with her window shade half lowered, a book open but unread in her lap. She was returning from a panel on inclusive leadership and hadn't had a moment of real rest. Andre had stayed behind in Seattle to finalize a hiring initiative for a new class of flight supervisors. It had been a good week, a productive one, but her heart was tired. She glanced out the window just as the sunlight shifted through the clouds, casting a soft golden hue inside the cabin. Her fingers closed the book. She wasn't reading anyway. Then she heard it, an uncertain voice, high-pitched, a little breathless. Excuse me, ma'am? I think I'm in the wrong seat. Nia turned. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, stood awkwardly in the aisle, clinging to a faded denim backpack and looking up at Nia with a mixture of fear and apology. Her skin was light brown, her hair in neat braids, with colorful beads clicking quietly as she shifted. Nia smiled. No worries, sweetheart. What seat are you looking for? The girl fumbled with a crumpled boarding pass. 21C. Back there. Nia nodded. Okay, that's a good seat too. The girl glanced at the wide leather first-class seats, her eyes lingering on the space, the quiet, the glass of sparkling water on a tray nearby. She swallowed. I just wanted to see what it looked like. Her honesty hit Nia like a wave. Not because it was bold, but because it was familiar. Years ago, she had been that girl. Pressing her nose against the glass near gate A12, wondering why some people seemed to float through life while others had to crawl. Nia looked up. What's your name? The girl hesitated, then replied softly. Alani. Nia smiled again. Hi, Alani. I'm Nia. Want to sit here with me for a minute? The girl's eyes widened. For real, just until the crew finishes boarding. Come on. Alani slid into the seat, legs swinging above the floor, eyes scanning every inch of her surroundings. She touched the armrest, the headrest, even the little silver button that tilted the seat back. This is like a movie, but for real life. Nia nodded. It's real, and one day, it'll be your normal. Alani looked over, You think so, I know so. A flight attendant came over, a young black man named Troy. He paused, noticing the girl. Is everything all right here? Nia gave a small nod. We're just talking. She'll head to her seat once everyone's settled. Troy's eyes flickered between them. Recognition passed across his face. Of course. Take your time. He turned away. Nia could see it in his posture, the awareness, the respect, the quiet shift that said, I see you. Alani reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, bent notebook. On the cover were hand-drawn sketches of airplanes, each one more detailed than the last. You like planes, I want to design them. I want to make one that's super quiet, so kids like me don't get scared on takeoff. Nia smiled gently. You already think like an engineer? Alani grinned. I'm going to call it the Alani Jet, or maybe Sky Princess. I don't know yet. Nia looked down at the notebook. Can I see your favorite drawing? Alani flipped through pages until she landed on a sleek aircraft with wings curved like a bird in motion. That one. It was beautiful, imaginative, aerodynamic, full of care. Nia leaned in. That's $1 billion design. The girl blinked. For real. For real. A voice came over the PA. Flight attendants. Prepare for departure. Nia sighed softly. Okay, time to head to 21C. But before you go... She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small pin. It was gold, shaped like a pair of wings. This was my first flight pin. I got it on the day I pitched my first aviation project. I've carried it with me ever since. But I think today, it belongs to you. Alani took the pin carefully, as if holding something sacred. Wow. Nia leaned down and whispered, just promise me one thing. What builds something the world's never seen? And never forget, you belong anywhere you choose to be. Alani nodded hard, eyes shimmering. Okay, I promise. She hugged Nia quickly, then hurried down the aisle. As Nia settled back into her seat, something in her chest softened. The tiredness didn't disappear, but it felt lighter. Troy returned, handing her a fresh glass of water. That was beautiful. Nia shrugged. She reminded me of me. He glanced toward the back of the plane. You probably just gave her a memory she'll carry her whole life. Nia looked out the window as the plane pushed back from the gate. Let's hope it becomes more than a memory. Let's hope it becomes a door. Back in Seattle, Andre was reviewing employee feedback from the first round of bias intervention simulations when Linda poked her head in. You need to see this. She held up her phone. A video, shaky and filmed, from the back of the plane, showed Nia and Alani sitting together, the moment quiet and intimate. The caption read, She gave a little black girl her wings and didn't even need to explain why. We all just felt it. Andre watched in silence. Then he whispered, That's my wife. The video went viral within hours, not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. People shared it not for shock value, but for hope. One comment read, My daughter just said, Maybe I can do that too. That's everything. Another said, This is how we raise leaders, by reminding them they already are. When the plane landed in Phoenix, Alani was the last one to disembark. She turned around at the jet bridge and waved at Nia one last time, the pin still shining on her shirt. Nia smiled, hand on her heart. As she stepped into the terminal, another little girl saw the pin and asked, Where'd you get that? Alani paused. From someone who told me I belonged. The auditorium was quiet, not with silence but with expectation. Light filtered in through tall glass windows, casting long reflections across rows of chairs filled with employees, board members, media, and community leaders. A large screen at the front read simply, Astralink's Initiative Open Skies. Andre Sullivan stood backstage, adjusting his lapel microphone. He could hear the buzz of conversations outside, the murmur of people waiting for something different, something real. He turned to Nia. She stood calm and collected, hands clasped loosely in front of her. Dressed in a deep blue suit and low heels, she looked like herself. Professional, sharp, grounded. "Are you ready?" She didn't answer right away. I don't know if anyone is ever ready to say something that might change the way people think. Andre nodded slowly, but we say it anyway. Their hands touched briefly, a signal, a promise. The music faded, and Thomas Wynn stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. At Astralinks, we believe the sky should belong to everyone. And today, we're introducing something we believe will make that real." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "Please welcome our co-owners, Andre and Nia Sullivan." The applause was steady but deeply felt. Andre began. "When we boarded Flight 411 3 months ago, we didn't expect our silence to speak so loudly. We simply wanted to fly, to reflect, to share time as husband and wife. But what we experienced was not unique to us. It was familiar. It was structural. And it was unacceptable." He looked out at the audience. No teleprompter, just presence. So we did something many advised us not to do. We stayed in the light. We told the truth. And we listened to thousands of stories like ours. He stepped back as Nia took the mic. "We believe it's not enough to fix one moment. We must transform the system that made it possible. Today, we introduce Open Skies, our boldest initiative yet." The screen behind her shifted, revealing the first headline, 1. Transparent upgrade policies across all flights. No more mystery lists. No more preferential whispers at the gate. Every upgrade decision will be auditable, visible, and equitable. Applause erupted. 2. A seat for all scholarship fund. Every quarter. Astralinks will sponsor 200 students from underserved communities to fly business or first class at no-cost-to-visit universities, internships, and career summits. Gasps. Then applause again. 3. Bias intervention. Training made public. All our crew training modules will be published online. We believe transparency invites accountability, and accountability builds trust. People were now on their feet. 4. First-class belonging campaign. We will feature real passengers of all backgrounds in our global marketing, telling stories not just of travel, but of arrival, of dignity, of dreams taking flight. Nia stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "We're not perfect, but we are committed." Andre returned beside her. "We're not just an airline. We're a vessel for possibility." The room rose again with applause, not performative, but personal. People clapped like they believed in something again. Later that evening, Andre and Nia sat in their living room, barefoot, wine glasses half full on the coffee table, CNN still playing softly in the background. The network had aired a special segment, The Couple Who Rewrote the Skies. They watched the anchor speak about them, show images from the press conference, even replay the video of Nia with Alani. Andre muted the volume. "What do you think she's doing right now?" Nia smiled, probably designing her Alani jet. He leaned his head back on the couch. Today felt like something shifted. It did, but something still tugged at Andre. "Do you think people will really change?" Nia thought for a moment. Not all at once, but one seat at a time. one flight at a time. Yes, I think they will. He looked over at her, his voice soft. Then it was worth it. She nodded. Every uncomfortable moment, every word spoken, every time we chose to stay instead of walk away. They held hands in the quiet. 2 weeks later, on a flight from Atlanta to Denver, a passenger in economy was quietly moved to first class after a gate agent overheard a crew member make an inappropriate joke. The agent reported it immediately. The passenger didn't even know what had happened behind the scenes. She just cried when she sat down. She later wrote in a letter, "I don't care about champagne or warm towels. I just care that someone saw me, valued me, and changed something without making me beg for it." In a classroom in Detroit, Alani stood at the front with her backpack slung low and her notebook held tight. Her teacher had asked each student to bring in something that inspired them. She held up the small golden wings Nia had given her. "This is from the nicest lady I ever met on a plane. She told me I belong. And one day, I'm gonna fly the plane I build." The room applauded. She didn't flinch. She stood tall. Back in Seattle, the first new Astralinks commercial aired. It didn't feature luxury lounges or champagne. It showed a child staring out a plane window, a nervous first-time flyer getting a reassuring nod from a flight attendant, an elderly woman being helped gently to her seat. The tagline read, "You don't just fly with us, you arrive with dignity." At the end of the year, a plaque was mounted inside the flagship aircraft of Astralinks' new Skies of Belonging fleet. It read, "In honor of every passenger who was ever asked to move, to wait, to prove they belonged. This cabin is yours. Fly forward." What started as an act of quiet discrimination ended as a bold reimagining of justice, dignity, and power. Andre and Nia Sullivan could have lashed out. They could have fired everyone and walked away. But instead, they did something far more powerful. They stayed. They listened. They transformed every insult into an opportunity for change. From one painful moment came a movement that said everyone deserves a seat, not just on a plane, but in society, in leadership, in the future. This story isn't just about who owns the jet. It's about who deserves to belong in the sky. And the answer is simple, all of us. So if this story moved you, if it made you reflect on what equity truly means, hit like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate courage. Together, we don't just tell stories. We lift voices. We create change. We fly forward.